Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing one of my instructive games. And I think you've heard me talk a lot about the importance of piece activity, and sometimes it's worth sacrificing a pawn and maybe even more to increase that piece activity, increase the quality of your pieces. So see, among other things, how I do that in this video. Check it out. I'm the white pieces here, and I'm playing against a friend of mine, and this is in a from East Aurora Chess, and this is in a Lee Chess arena set up for our club. So I start out with e4. My opponent plays c5, knight to f3, and knight to c6. And I play the open Sicilian, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and here my opponent plays d6. Probably worried about something like this, but and also just typically a typical move in the Sicilian, but it does allow me something. Instead, maybe knight to f6. Because he plays d6, I'm able to play c4, putting an extra pawn on this d5 square, which is typically a good thing to do. Okay, my opponent plays a6. I play knight to c3, plays knight to f6, bishop to e3, bishop to d7. Here, he could have gone for something like knight to g4, kind of harassing this guy, but he didn't. In any case, it wasn't too big of a deal either way. Bishop to d7, bishop e2, e6, castle, and bishop e7. Now here we have just sort of a normal Sicilian position with maybe just a slight advantage for white because of the extra space, but really shouldn't be that big of a deal. Now the only difference between this and a normal kind of open Sicilian would be the insertion of this c4 move, this Maroczy bind as it's called, which maybe gives me a little bit more of an edge. Okay, I play f4, and here both e5 and f5 are potential pawn breaks in the future. So my opponent takes, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and here he plays queen c7. Pretty straightforward, but and kind of covering this e5 thing. But it does allow a tactic which I didn't see during the game. Again, this was a rapid game, but I'll show it to you here. And that is e5. Now, in a longer game, I would always look at these e5 and these f5 moves. But let's take a look here. D takes e5, f takes e5, and the knight has to go back to g8 because all of these other squares are covered. Okay, knight to e4, already looking at this square. And already positionally, white is looking great here, but there is a tactical threat here too. So here the engine says knight to h6 is best, and here knight to d6 check. Now moving the king doesn't make a ton of sense, so bishop takes, pawn takes, and if queen takes, we now have this deadly fork with bishop takes g7. And basically white's going to win a piece. For example, queen takes d1, rook takes d1, rook to g8, and bishop takes h6. But I didn't see this during the game, but so we learn from our mistakes, of course. So queen to c7 and rook to c1, looking to line up this rook against the queen. Okay, e5, this is a typical pawn break, and typically it's not great to take here positionally. It's not horrible sometimes, but here f takes e5, d takes e5, and here we can see that if, for example, bishop to e3, now black has sort of solved one of his opening problems with no longer having this pawn weakness on d6. But of course, I did not take, and instead I played bishop to e3. And that way, if he did take here on f4, I would have a nice, decent position here. Even though this pawn is isolated, I've got a lot of space, and I'm putting pressure on this d6 pawn, and I've got an open f-file for my rook. Okay, my opponent plays h6. Here I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure why he played this. Actually, I find out later why he played this. Maybe I'm thinking the more natural castling would have been standard move to make here. And this is sort of one of the primary lessons behind uh, this game, is that because he doesn't castle here or anytime soon, it allows me to gain a great initiative. So let me show you how I did that. Okay, so he plays h6, and I play f5, just closing this off, getting some space, and uh, trying to make life miserable for black's bishops. Um, Bishop to c6, putting pressure here. He's got two attackers. I've only got one defender, so I play bishop to f3. Now, my bishop here isn't so great, but it is serving a very important purpose, protecting this pawn. Now, normally in this type of position, d5 would be a great move at some point, but because of this pawn on c4, that's very difficult for him. He plays knight to h7. And here again, I think castling would have been pretty good overall. I think sometimes, and I do this too in some openings, you're trying to optimize your development and the power of your other pieces, that you don't want to take that tempo to castle. But sometimes it's very important to do. And also, it does develop your rook. So there, I think he should have castled. Instead, he plays knight to h7. And I think his idea is to maybe try to free this bishop and trade off here. But here, I was looking at this position, and as you can see, I wanted to take advantage of this king in the center. And I thought to myself, how can I do this? And my idea is to, I wanted to deflect. Because this knight moved away from f6 where it was protecting d5, I wanted to deflect this bishop and then gain the d5 square. So I played b4. Again, my opponent saw that I was thinking of playing b5, so he plays queen to d7. And although I could have reinforced this with something like queen to e2, and then maybe thought about bringing the rook here, and then or playing b5. Again, being a rapid game, I thought it was worth the pawn to get this d5 square. So let me show you what happened. b5, a takes b5, and here c takes b5, and bishop takes b5. So far, so good. And here was the idea, knight to d5 here, offering the exchange. Let me show you what happens if he takes that rook. Bishop takes f1, rook to c7. Now here, I think knight takes c7 also works, but in the game I was calculating rook to c7. Okay, the queen moves out of the way, and here I hit him with this check. And probably best for him just to take it. And this position, you could see actually this pawn is safe, because if he does this, then queen to c4 is quite dangerous. So this position is big edge for white here. Let me just show you this. If he tries to retreat, then I think just simply knight to d5, or even better, maybe queen to d6. Queen takes d6 is pretty deadly. And let me just see here. If he plays something like rook to d8, then I just back up with queen takes e5, and my bishop's covering, so my king is safe. And again, big edge for white. But he saw that and didn't take it to his credit, and so he plays bishop to d8. So actually, the engine says that he's doing fine here, but I want you to understand that sometimes, and this is why I try to encourage you not to overemphasize the engine analysis. There's certain positions like this one where even though he's up a pawn, even though it looks like he's doing okay, there's a lot of ways he can go wrong, and I just have so much pressure. My pieces are very active here, and I have a lot of threats because of this beautiful knight on d5. So let's see what happens. Here I play rook to f2, and a couple ideas with that. I can come over here to c2, maybe not right away because of bishop to a4, but also I'm protecting this pawn on a2. So kind of just a flexible move, and this rook can go in a bunch of different places. Here my opponent tries to get some activity here with knight to g5. And again, I think castling would have been great here. Now he's probably worried about some of this pressure that might be coming, but as you can see, he's going to have trouble anyway with this. So knight to g5, really it's only targeting this bishop, and you can see this is my worst piece right now. So I move forward with queen to c2. Probably a bunch of ways I could have done this, but I think queen to c2 was fine. Knight takes f3 check. Again, not a super big mistake, but what it does is it opens up the G file for me, which will play into the game later. Bishop to c6. And here I didn't want him to exchange on d5, and I didn't want to retreat this knight. So I thought to myself, well, in this position, I've got a lot of positional edges. I've got this half-open G file where I'm going to be attacking over here. I've got this pawn that can push here, and I've got the C file. So I thought, why don't I trade off this dark square bishop? Because this light square bishop, because of these pawns in the center, doesn't really have a ton of scope. So I played knight to b6. Okay, bishop takes b6, bishop takes b6, and here black finally castled. But again, I already have the G file, and again, objectively, black is probably okay. But this is a rapid game, and also I just have a ton of activity with my pieces that's going to be very dangerous. Rook to g2, and here my opponent plays rook to a6, and this is sort of a nothing move. I mean, I guess he's looking, he can maybe look to double here, but just this one move attack doesn't really do much. In fact, it forces me to put my bishop where I want to put it, which is on e3, again threatening to take on h6. So here my opponent plays his king to h6 naturally, protecting and getting out of this pin. I play queen to f2, now looking to come over to the king side. And again, this is one of the general lessons, is that when you are, you want to make all of your pieces moving towards the same target or towards the same goal, which is in this case putting pressure on the king. And again, it could be used in a more a more broad manner, in that you can use that pressure to create other weaknesses, for example. So it's not that I'm necessarily going to checkmate the king, but the concessions he's going to have to make to protect the king can lead to other advantages. Okay, here he plays queen to e7, trying to protect here, but that can be dangerous as well. However, if he played rook to g8, I was planning this queen to h4, perhaps, and putting a ton of pressure here would have been probably what I would have done. But instead, he played queen to e7, and here threatening checkmate. And it's very dangerous at this point. He plays queen to f6. And what he could have... I mean, queen to f6 is pretty good. What I played here was rook to d1, and the idea was to deflect the queen. Let's just say he makes a move like this. I'm just giving this as an example. I'm not saying that's a good move. Then this could be quite dangerous, because now this queen is stuck. So instead, he played rook to g8, making a lot of sense. And here I played queen to h3, just putting more pressure here. And now there is a threat, as you can see, because this pawn is now pinned. And my opponent, what he could have done was try to break out with d5. And again, the engine says he's probably got a decent game, but you can see why this is probably a hard move for him to make. There's bishop to g5, a ton of pressure, queen to d6. And it's just, during a rapid game with not much time left, it's hard to make these kind of moves. So he played bishop to d7, trying to break free, probably looking to do this because of this pin, but that allows me to trap his queen. And after a couple little moves, bishop takes, pawn takes, again, his queen is still trapped. Queen takes, rook takes, rook takes, and then here, after a couple more moves, my opponent resigned. But hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. Two main lessons in this game are to, of course, ensure your king's safety. It's going to take a move to do it by castling, and I know there are openings where you don't castle right away. But in general, when you're first starting out learning new openings, it's often helpful to castle. And on the other end, if your opponent hasn't ensured his king's safety, it's often important to open some lines and try to get your pieces in a position to try to put pressure on your opponent's king. Not necessarily that you're going to be able to checkmate him, but often that will create other weaknesses in your opponent's camp and force him to make positional or tactical concessions that you can take advantage of. Want to invite you to my Twitch stream on Tuesdays. Typically, or most of the time, I am studying a master game using the solitary chess or guess the move method. And so you can study with me. We keep score, bring a notebook. Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, and I'll have the link in the description below. But I hope you can join me, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.